What's up, culture watchers? Welcome to Media Lens. Today we're analyzing how agnosticism is portrayed in popular culture and media, from films and TV shows to literature and digital platforms. How have these representations evolved over time? Do they accurately capture the philosophical depth of agnostic thought? And what do these portrayals tell us about changing cultural attitudes toward religious uncertainty? Let's dive in. Agnosticism, derived from the Greek word agnostos, meaning unknown or unknowable, represents a philosophical position regarding the limits of human knowledge, particularly concerning metaphysical claims about the existence of deities or ultimate reality. While often misunderstood as merely a middle ground between theism and atheism, agnosticism constitutes a distinct epistemological stance with rich philosophical underpinnings that have evolved significantly since the Enlightenment era. David Hume, 1711–1776, though never using the term agnosticism himself, laid crucial groundwork for agnostic thought through his radical empiricism and skepticism. In his Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion, Hume systematically dismantled traditional arguments for God's existence while refusing to definitively claim that no deity exists. His insistence that knowledge claims must be proportioned to evidence established a philosophical framework later central to agnostic thinking. Hume's approach to religious questions emphasized the limitations of human reason when addressing matters beyond empirical verification, arguing that we should suspend judgment on questions that transcend experience. Immanuel Kant, 1724–1804, further developed this trajectory by distinguishing between phenomena, things as they appear to us, and noumena, things as they are in themselves. In his Critique of Pure Reason, Kant argued that human understanding is confined to the phenomenal realm, making knowledge of transcendent realities like God inherently inaccessible. While Kant personally maintained belief in God on moral grounds, his epistemological framework provided philosophical justification for agnostic positions by establishing boundaries around what can be known with certainty. The term agnosticism itself was coined by Thomas Henry Huxley in 1869. As a scientist and advocate for Darwin's evolutionary theory, Huxley sought a philosophical position that respected empirical methodology while acknowledging its limitations. He defined agnosticism not as a creed, but as a method that rigorously follows reason as far as it can take you, while refusing to accept conclusions without adequate evidence. Huxley's formulation distinguished agnosticism from both dogmatic atheism and faith-based theism, positioning it as an intellectually honest response to metaphysical questions. By the early 20th century, agnosticism gained further philosophical sophistication through logical positivism and analytical philosophy. Thinkers like Bertrand Russell refined agnostic arguments by analyzing the logical structure of religious claims. Russell's famous celestial teapot analogy illustrated that the burden of proof rests with those making positive claims about unverifiable entities. His essay, Why I Am Not a Christian, articulated a position that many would identify as agnostic, not definitively denying God's existence, but finding insufficient evidence to warrant belief. The mid-20th century witnessed existentialist approaches to agnosticism through figures like Albert Camus, who grappled with the implications of living in a potentially meaningless universe. While not strictly an agnostic philosopher, Camus' concept of the absurd, the tension between human desire for meaning and the universe's silence, resonated with agnostic sensibilities about the limits of knowledge and the human condition. Contemporary analytical philosophy has further refined agnostic positions through thinkers like Anthony Kenny, Graham Oppy, and Robin Le Poitevin. These philosophers have developed nuanced taxonomies of agnosticism, distinguishing between weak agnosticism, the personal position of not knowing whether God exists, and strong agnosticism, the claim that no one can know whether God exists. They have also explored agnosticism's relationship to concepts like evidentialism, fallibilism, and probabilistic reasoning. Neuroscience and cognitive science have introduced new dimensions to agnostic thought. Researchers like Patricia Churchland and Daniel Dennett have investigated how human cognitive architecture might inherently limit our ability to comprehend certain metaphysical questions. This naturalistic approach suggests that agnosticism might be the appropriate response to questions that exceed our evolved cognitive capacities. In contemporary philosophical discourse, agnosticism has expanded beyond purely religious questions to address broader epistemological issues about consciousness, free will, and the foundations of ethics. Philosophers like Thomas Nagel have argued for a form of epistemological modesty that acknowledges inherent limitations in human understanding across multiple domains. The philosophical foundations of agnosticism continue to evolve in dialogue with scientific advances, religious thought, and epistemological theories. Far from representing intellectual indecision, agnosticism embodies a principled commitment to proportioning belief to evidence and acknowledging the boundaries of human knowledge. As philosophical traditions from Eastern and indigenous perspectives increasingly enter Western academic discourse, agnosticism may develop new dimensions that incorporate diverse approaches to knowledge, certainty, and transcendence. The enduring relevance of agnosticism in philosophical thought suggests that questions about the limits of knowledge remain as vital today as when Hume first articulated his skeptical approach. As humanity continues to push the boundaries of scientific understanding while grappling with existential questions, agnosticism offers a philosophical framework that balances intellectual humility with rigorous inquiry, a position as philosophically sophisticated as it is personally compelling for many contemporary thinkers. Agnosticism versus atheism. Understanding the key differences in contemporary discussions about religious belief and disbelief, the terms agnosticism and atheism are frequently used interchangeably, creating considerable confusion about their distinct meanings. This confusion isn't merely semantic. It reflects fundamental differences in philosophical positions regarding knowledge, belief, and the nature of evidence. Understanding these differences requires careful examination of how these terms have evolved and what they represent in both academic discourse and everyday usage. At its etymological core, atheism derives from the Greek atheos, meaning without God, while agnosticism comes from agnostos, meaning unknown or unknowable. This linguistic distinction highlights their fundamental difference. Atheism primarily addresses belief, while agnosticism addresses knowledge. An atheist lacks belief in deities, while an agnostic maintains that the existence of deities is unknown or unknowable. This distinction becomes clearer when we recognize that atheism and agnosticism actually answer different questions. Atheism responds to the question, "Do you believe in God?" while agnosticism addresses, "Can we know whether God exists?" This distinction allows for important combinations of positions. One can be an agnostic atheist, not believing in God while acknowledging that God's existence cannot be known with certainty, or an agnostic theist, believing in God while acknowledging that God's existence cannot be proven. These nuanced positions demonstrate that agnosticism and atheism are not points on a spectrum of disbelief, but rather positions on different philosophical axes, one concerning epistemology, the study of knowledge, and the other concerning ontology, the study of what exists. The philosophical underpinnings of these positions reveal further differences. Modern atheism often draws on naturalism and materialism, philosophical frameworks that maintain that natural laws and forces operate in the universe without supernatural intervention. Many atheists adopt methodological naturalism, the approach that explanation should not invoke supernatural causes, as a guiding principle. In contrast, agnosticism is grounded in epistemological considerations about the limits of human knowledge, often drawing on traditions of philosophical skepticism that question our ability to know certain kinds of truths with certainty. Historically, these positions have evolved through distinct trajectories. While skepticism about deities dates to ancient Greece, modern atheism gained prominence during the Enlightenment as a response to traditional religious authority. Figures like Baron de Holbach explicitly rejected theism in favor of materialist explanations. Agnosticism emerged later as a formal position, with Thomas Henry Huxley coining the term in 1869 to describe his methodological approach to knowledge claims. Huxley characterized agnosticism not as a creed, but as a method that follows evidence rigorously while refusing to claim knowledge beyond what can be demonstrated. The burden of proof represents another key area of divergence. Many atheists, particularly those who identify as weak or negative atheists, simply lack belief in gods without asserting their non-existence, arguing that the burden of proof lies with those making positive claims about deities. Strong or positive atheists who assert that no gods exist accept a burden of proof for this claim. Agnostics, meanwhile, often focus on the evidential gap itself, maintaining that available evidence is insufficient for either theistic or atheistic certainty. In practical terms, these philosophical differences manifest in distinct approaches to religious discourse. Atheists may actively challenge religious claims and institutions, viewing them as factually incorrect or socially harmful. Agnostics might instead emphasize the importance of intellectual humility when addressing ultimate questions, sometimes engaging with religious ideas as potentially valuable perspectives, even while questioning their factual basis. These different approaches reflect varying priorities. Atheism often emphasizes the importance of believing true things and rejecting falsehoods, while agnosticism emphasizes recognizing the limits of human knowledge. The social perception of these positions also differs significantly. In American society, atheism has historically faced stronger stigmatization, with studies consistently showing atheists among the least trusted groups. Agnosticism, with its emphasis on uncertainty rather than rejection, often provokes less social resistance. This difference in reception has practical consequences for how individuals identify and express their non-religious perspectives in various social contexts. Contemporary debates have further complicated these distinctions. Some prominent atheist writers like Richard Dawkins have proposed a spectrum of positions ranging from strong theism to strong atheism, with agnosticism representing middle positions. Critics argue this framework mischaracterizes agnosticism by reducing it to uncertainty rather than recognizing it as a distinct epistemological stance. Meanwhile, some philosophers have proposed alternative frameworks, such as theological non-cognitivism, the view that religious language is meaningless, or agnosticism, the view that the question of God's existence is incoherent until God is clearly defined. The internet age has transformed how these positions are discussed and understood. Online communities have developed distinct atheist and agnostic identities, sometimes emphasizing their differences and sometimes finding common cause in secular activism. These communities have created spaces for exploring nuanced positions that traditional religious secular binaries fail to capture. Understanding the differences between agnosticism and atheism matters beyond philosophical clarity. These distinctions shape how individuals conceptualize their own relationships to religious questions, how interreligious dialogue proceeds, and how societies navigate increasingly diverse belief landscapes. By recognizing that atheism and agnosticism represent different types of responses to religious questions, rather than competing answers to the same question, we can foster more nuanced conversations about belief, knowledge, and the limits of human understanding in an increasingly complex world. Famous agnostics. Throughout history and their contributions. Throughout history, many influential thinkers, scientists, artists, and public figures have embraced agnosticism as their philosophical position regarding the existence of deities or ultimate metaphysical truths. Their agnostic perspectives have shaped fields ranging from science and philosophy to literature and politics, demonstrating that intellectual humility regarding ultimate questions can coexist with profound contributions to human knowledge and culture. This exploration of famous agnostics throughout history reveals the diverse expressions and impacts of agnostic thought across different domains of human endeavor. Thomas Henry Huxley, 1825–1895, the English biologist who coined the term agnosticism, in 1869, stands as the foundational figure in the formal articulation of agnostic philosophy. As Darwin's bulldog, Huxley vigorously defended evolutionary theory, while maintaining that scientific methodology required withholding judgment on matters beyond empirical verification. His agnosticism wasn't merely a personal religious position, but a methodological approach that emphasized intellectual integrity. Huxley's contributions extended beyond this philosophical innovation. His work in comparative anatomy, paleontology, and educational reform transformed scientific education in Victorian England. By insisting that science classes be available to working-class students and women, Huxley democratized scientific knowledge while modeling how agnostic principles could inform both scientific inquiry and social progress. Charles Darwin, 1809–1882, though often mischaracterized as an atheist, expressed views more accurately described as agnostic. After developing his theory of evolution by natural selection, Darwin struggled with religious questions, writing in his autobiography that the immense suffering in nature made traditional theological explanations increasingly difficult to accept. However, he explicitly rejected atheism, stating, "The mystery of the beginning of all things is insoluble by us, and I, for one, must be content to remain an agnostic." Darwin's revolutionary scientific work, combined with his philosophical humility regarding ultimate questions, exemplifies how agnosticism can accompany groundbreaking scientific advancement. Bertrand Russell, 1872–1970, the Nobel Prize-winning philosopher and mathematician, identified as an agnostic despite being frequently labeled an atheist. In his essay, "Am I an Atheist or an Agnostic?" Russell explained, "As a philosopher, if I were speaking to a purely philosophic audience, I should say that I ought to describe myself as an agnostic, because I do not think that there is a conclusive argument by which one can prove that there is not a God." Russell's agnosticism informed his approach to epistemology, ethics, and social criticism. His contributions to mathematical logic, analytic philosophy, and social justice advocacy demonstrate how agnostic principles can inform rigorous logical thinking while supporting humanitarian values. Susan B. Anthony, 1820–1906, the pioneering American suffragist, maintained an agnostic position throughout much of her life after leaving her Quaker background. While fighting for women's rights, Anthony recognized how religious institutions often reinforced gender inequality, while also acknowledging that many religious women were vital allies in the suffrage movement. Her pragmatic approach to religious questions, focusing on human rights rather than theological debates, exemplifies how agnosticism can inform social activism. Anthony's legacy reminds us that agnosticism need not lead to disengagement from moral causes, but can instead focus attention on tangible human needs rather than metaphysical certainties. Albert Einstein, 1879–1955, though sometimes claimed by both religious and atheistic camps, expressed views most consistent with agnosticism. Einstein rejected both anthropomorphic conceptions of God and dogmatic atheism, writing, "I have repeatedly said that in my opinion the idea of a personal God is a childlike one. You may call me an agnostic, but I do not share the crusading spirit of the professional atheist." Einstein's cosmic religious feeling, a sense of awe and wonder at the universe's rational order without personifying it, influenced his scientific work and humanitarian advocacy. His ability to maintain intellectual humility while revolutionizing physics demonstrates how agnosticism can support rather than hinder scientific genius. E. B. Du Bois, 1868–1963, The influential sociologist, historian, and civil rights activist embraced agnosticism while recognizing religion's complex role in African American communities. Though raised in a religious household, Du Bois developed an agnostic position that allowed him to critically examine how Christianity had been used both to justify slavery and to inspire resistance. His scholarly work, particularly The Souls of Black Folk, explored how religious expression could embody cultural resilience without requiring metaphysical certainty. Du Bois' nuanced approach to religion while fighting for racial justice illustrates how agnosticism can inform sophisticated cultural and political analysis. Virginia Woolf, 1882-1941, the modernist literary pioneer, expressed agnostic views throughout her writing career. Rejecting traditional religious frameworks while exploring profound questions of consciousness and meaning, Woolf's novels like To the Lighthouse and Mrs. Dalloway examine how humans create significance in a world without metaphysical certainties. Her innovative stream of consciousness technique captured the complex, contingent nature of human experience that aligned with her agnostic perspective. Woolf's literary contributions demonstrate how agnosticism can inspire artistic innovation rather than nihilism, opening new ways of representing human experience freed from conventional religious narratives. Carl Sagan, 1934-1996, the renowned astronomer and science communicator, articulated a form of agnosticism grounded in scientific methodology. While expressing skepticism toward traditional religious claims, Sagan maintained that absolute certainty about metaphysical questions was unwarranted, famously stating, "An atheist has to know a lot more than I know. An atheist is someone who knows there is no God. By some definitions, atheism is very stupid." Sagan's cosmic perspective, conveyed through his book and television series Cosmos, inspired wonder at the universe while emphasizing the provisional nature of all knowledge claims. His ability to communicate scientific principles to the general public while maintaining philosophical humility made him an influential exemplar of agnostic thought in contemporary American culture. These diverse figures represent just a sampling of prominent agnostics whose contributions have shaped modern thought and society. Their varied approaches to agnosticism, from Huxley's methodological emphasis to Einstein's cosmic wonder to Anthony's pragmatic activism, demonstrate that agnosticism is not a monolithic position, but a philosophical approach that can inform diverse intellectual and creative pursuits. By acknowledging the limits of human knowledge while remaining committed to rigorous inquiry and ethical action, these historical figures illustrate how agnosticism can serve as a productive philosophical foundation for advancing human understanding and welfare across multiple domains of endeavor. Living as an agnostic in religious communities. Challenges and opportunities. Navigating life as an agnostic within predominantly religious communities presents a unique set of challenges and opportunities that shape both personal identity and social relationships. For the estimated millions of Americans who identify as agnostic while living in regions where religious practice remains central to community life, this navigation involves complex negotiations between personal philosophical integrity and meaningful social participation. Understanding these dynamics requires examining the lived experiences of agnostics across various religious contexts in America today. The fundamental challenge for many agnostics stems from widespread misunderstandings about what agnosticism actually entails. In religious communities, agnostics often find themselves mischaracterized as indecisive, spiritually confused, or simply passing through a phase of doubt before eventually returning to faith. This mischaracterization fails to recognize agnosticism as a principled philosophical position regarding the limits of knowledge, particularly concerning metaphysical claims. When family members or community leaders frame agnosticism as merely spiritual searching rather than a coherent epistemological stance, agnostics must constantly justify their position, creating a cognitive and emotional burden not experienced by those whose worldviews align with community norms. Social isolation represents another significant challenge, particularly in communities where religious participation structures social life. In many American towns and suburbs, churches, synagogues, and mosques function not only as spiritual centers, but as social hubs where friendships form, business connections develop, and community support networks operate. Agnostics who decline participation in religious institutions may find themselves excluded from these vital social ecosystems. This exclusion can be especially pronounced during life transitions like moving to a new community, starting a family, or recovering from personal hardship, moments when social support networks prove most crucial. The resulting isolation can contribute to higher rates of reported loneliness among non-religious individuals in highly religious regions. Family relationships often present the most emotionally charged challenges for agnostics in religious communities. When family traditions, celebrations, and identities center around shared religious practice, an agnostic family member may experience ongoing tension between authentic self-expression and familial harmony. Holiday gatherings, life cycle events, like weddings and funerals, and child-rearing decisions become potential flashpoints where philosophical differences manifest in practical disagreements. Many agnostics report developing complex strategies for navigating these situations, from selective participation in religious rituals to crafting alternative explanations for their children that respect both their own philosophical position and religious family members' perspectives. Professional consequences can also follow from agnostic identification in certain communities. In regions where religious affiliation signals trustworthiness and community commitment, agnostics may face implicit or explicit discrimination in hiring, promotion, and business relationships. Studies have documented that Americans express greater distrust toward atheists and agnostics than toward most other minority groups, with this distrust particularly pronounced in more religious regions. This reality leads many agnostics to practice what sociologists call identity management, selectively disclosing their philosophical position depending on social context and potential consequences. Despite these challenges, living as an agnostic in religious communities also presents unique opportunities for personal growth and social contribution. Many agnostics report that navigating religious environments with different epistemological assumptions has developed their capacity for intellectual empathy, the ability to understand worldviews fundamentally different from their own. This skill enables them to build bridges across philosophical divides in ways that benefit both religious and non-religious community members. In increasingly polarized social and political contexts, this capacity for cross-worldview understanding represents a valuable social resource. Agnostics often develop sophisticated ethical frameworks that draw on multiple traditions while remaining open to revision based on new evidence and reasoning. Without relying on religious authority for moral guidance, many agnostics engage deeply with philosophical ethics, scientific findings about human flourishing, and diverse cultural wisdom traditions. This synthetic approach to ethics can enrich community discussions about shared values and social priorities, introducing perspectives that might otherwise be absent from conversations dominated by religious frameworks. Many religious communities themselves benefit from agnostic participation. Thoughtful agnostics often ask questions that help religious communities articulate their beliefs more precisely and consider implications they might otherwise overlook. Rather than simply rejecting religious claims, philosophically engaged agnostics frequently encourage deeper theological reflection through respectful questioning. Progressive religious communities increasingly recognize this value, with some explicitly welcoming agnostics as valued community members who contribute to intellectual and spiritual growth. Practical strategies have emerged for agnostics seeking to thrive in religious contexts while maintaining philosophical integrity. Many find community through secular organizations like Sunday Assembly, ethical culture societies, or Unitarian Universalist congregations that provide community structure without requiring specific metaphysical commitments. Online communities connect geographically isolated agnostics, providing intellectual companionship and practical advice for navigating local religious environments. Some agnostics participate selectively in religious institutions, appreciating cultural traditions, music, architecture, and community service opportunities, while maintaining philosophical reservations about theological claims. Raising children presents both challenges and opportunities for agnostic parents in religious communities. Many develop approaches that expose children to diverse religious and philosophical perspectives, while encouraging critical thinking about knowledge claims. Rather than sheltering children from religious ideas or imposing agnostic conclusions, these parents often engage children in age-appropriate conversations about how people know things and why thoughtful people reach different conclusions about ultimate questions. Research suggests this approach can foster intellectual curiosity and ethical reasoning skills that serve children well regardless of their eventual philosophical positions. As American religious demographics continue evolving, with increasing numbers identifying as religiously unaffiliated, the experience of agnostics in religious communities is also changing. In many regions, being agnostic no longer carries the social stigma it once did, creating more space for open, philosophical exchange. Interfaith and secular religious dialogue initiatives increasingly include agnostic perspectives, recognizing that meaningful community building requires engaging philosophical diversity rather than enforcing conformity. Living as an agnostic in religious communities ultimately requires balancing authentic self-expression with respectful community participation, a balance that looks different for each individual based on personal circumstances, local context, and philosophical priorities. By navigating this balance thoughtfully, many agnostics contribute to more inclusive communities where diverse approaches to knowledge and meaning can coexist, creating social environments that honor both shared human needs and diverse philosophical perspectives. The spectrum of agnostic thought. From weak to strong positions, agnosticism, often simplistically characterized as mere uncertainty about God's existence, actually encompasses a rich spectrum of philosophical positions with varying epistemological commitments and implications. From tentative personal admissions of ignorance to robust claims about the inherent limitations of human knowledge, agnostic perspectives vary widely in their scope, certainty, and philosophical foundations. Understanding this spectrum illuminates the sophisticated nature of agnostic thought and its significant contributions to epistemology, philosophy of religion, and broader intellectual discourse. At one end of this spectrum lies what philosophers term weak or soft agnosticism, the position that an individual does not currently know whether a deity exists. This modest epistemological claim makes no assertions about what others might know or what is ultimately knowable. It simply acknowledges a personal state of ignorance regarding metaphysical questions. Weak agnosticism often takes the form, "I don't know whether God exists." This position remains compatible with continued investigation and leaves open the possibility that sufficient evidence might eventually emerge to warrant belief or disbelief. Many scientists and philosophers adopt this form of agnosticism as a provisional stance aligned with intellectual humility, recognizing the current limitations of their knowledge while remaining open to new evidence. Moving further along the spectrum, we encounter temporal agnosticism, the view that while definitive knowledge about deities might be theoretically possible, current human knowledge and methods are insufficient to reach justified conclusions. Temporal agnostics maintain that the God question remains open, not because it is inherently unanswerable, but because humanity has not yet developed adequate conceptual frameworks, gathered sufficient evidence, or resolved fundamental philosophical problems necessary for addressing it. This position often accompanies a progressive view of human knowledge, suggesting that future intellectual developments might eventually resolve questions currently beyond our grasp. Philosopher Anthony Kenny exemplifies this perspective, arguing that current theological and atheological arguments remain insufficient while leaving open the possibility of future resolution. Near the center of the spectrum lies global agnosticism, the position that while knowledge about some deities or conceptions of God might be possible, other concepts remain inherently unknowable. This nuanced position recognizes that God encompasses diverse concepts ranging from naturalistic pantheism to transcendent personal beings, each raising distinct epistemological challenges. Global agnostics might maintain that empirical evidence could potentially confirm or disconfirm certain conceptions of divinity, such as gods who intervene in the physical world, while insisting that other conceptions, such as a deity existing outside space and time, remain inherently beyond empirical verification. This position acknowledges the heterogeneous nature of religious claims, rather than treating God as a single concept with uniform epistemological implications. Further along the spectrum, we find strong or hard agnosticism, the position that knowledge about God's existence is inherently impossible for any human being. Unlike weak agnosticism's personal acknowledgement of ignorance, strong agnosticism makes a universal claim about the limits of human knowledge. This position takes the form, no one can know whether God exists. Strong agnosticism typically rests on arguments about the inherent limitations of human cognition, the nature of religious language, or the logical structure of theological claims. Philosopher Immanuel Kant's distinction between phenomena, things as they appear to us, and noumena, things as they are in themselves, provides one philosophical foundation for strong agnosticism, suggesting that transcendent realities lie inherently beyond human cognitive capacities. At the far end of the spectrum lies what some philosophers call radical agnosticism, or agnosticism, the position that questions about God's existence are themselves meaningless, incoherent, or fundamentally misconceived. Rather than claiming ignorance about an answer, radical agnostics challenge the intelligibility of the question itself. This position often focuses on linguistic and conceptual problems in theological discourse, arguing that terms like God lack sufficient clarity or coherent reference to generate meaningful knowledge claims. Philosophers in the logical positivist tradition, like A. J. Ayer, exemplify this approach by arguing that metaphysical claims lacking empirical verification conditions are literally meaningless rather than simply unverified. Across this spectrum, agnostic positions vary not only in their strength, but also in their scope. Some agnostics limit their epistemological claims to traditional Western conceptions of God, while others extend similar reasoning to all supernatural or metaphysical claims. Some apply agnostic principles only to existence claims about deities, while others extend them to claims about divine attributes, religious experiences, or moral teachings. This variation in scope produces diverse positions like religious agnosticism, uncertainty specifically about religious claims, mystical agnosticism, certainty about God's existence coupled with uncertainty about divine nature, and spiritual agnosticism, openness to transcendent dimensions of experience while maintaining epistemological humility about their interpretation. The philosophical foundations supporting these various agnostic positions also differ significantly. Some agnostics ground their views in empiricism, arguing that claims exceeding possible experience exceed justifiable belief. Others base their agnosticism on rationalist arguments about conceptual limitations or logical paradoxes in theological reasoning. Still others adopt pragmatic approaches, suggesting that metaphysical questions should be evaluated based on their practical consequences rather than their correspondence to ultimate reality. These diverse philosophical foundations demonstrate that agnosticism represents not a single position, but a family of related approaches to knowledge and belief. Contemporary analytical philosophy has further refined the spectrum of agnostic thought by distinguishing between knowledge-focused and justification-focused versions of agnosticism. Knowledge agnostics claim that humans cannot know whether God exists, while justification agnostics make the more modest claim that belief in God's existence or non-existence currently lacks adequate justification. This distinction acknowledges that knowledge typically requires stronger conditions than justified belief, allowing for positions that deny knowledge while permitting rational belief or disbelief based on probabilistic reasoning. The spectrum of agnostic thought also includes positions differentiated by their attitude toward belief in the absence of knowledge. Some agnostics maintain that without sufficient evidence, one should suspend belief entirely, a position sometimes called agnostic atheism. Others argue that practical considerations might justify belief despite evidential uncertainty, a position aligned with Pascalian wagers, or William James's will to believe arguments. Still others suggest that metaphysical questions might be approached through non-cognitive attitudes like wonder, aesthetic appreciation, or existential commitment rather than propositional belief. This rich spectrum of agnostic positions demonstrates that agnosticism constitutes not a vague middle ground between theism and atheism, but a sophisticated family of epistemological approaches to questions that potentially exceed human cognitive capacities. By recognizing this spectrum, we gain a more nuanced understanding of how thoughtful individuals navigate the boundaries of knowledge and the challenges of belief in domains where certainty remains elusive. The diversity of agnostic thought reminds us that intellectual humility takes many forms, each offering distinct insights into the relationship between human minds and ultimate reality. Agnosticism and science, compatible worldviews. The relationship between agnosticism and science represents one of the most fascinating intersections in contemporary intellectual discourse. While popular narratives often position science and religious belief in fundamental conflict, agnosticism offers a nuanced philosophical framework that many scientists find compatible with scientific methodology and discoveries. This compatibility merits careful examination, as it reveals important insights about the nature of scientific inquiry, the limits of human knowledge, and the relationship between empirical investigation and metaphysical questions. At its methodological core, science operates through a form of disciplined skepticism that shares significant philosophical ground with agnosticism. Scientific methodology requires suspending judgment until sufficient evidence accumulates, revising conclusions in light of new data, and maintaining awareness of the provisional nature of scientific knowledge. These methodological commitments closely parallel agnosticism's insistence on proportioning belief to evidence and acknowledging the limits of human knowledge. Thomas Henry Huxley, who coined the term agnosticism in 1869, explicitly connected his philosophical position to scientific methodology, describing agnosticism as the fundamental axiom of modern science that follows evidence as far as it can take you, while refusing to accept conclusions without adequate justification. This methodological alignment manifests in scientists' approach to unexplained phenomena. When confronting gaps in scientific understanding, responsible scientists typically adopt a position of methodological naturalism, investigating natural causes while suspending judgment about supernatural explanations, rather than making definitive claims about ultimate reality. This approach parallels agnosticism's suspension of judgment regarding questions that exceed available evidence. The history of science demonstrates the productivity of this approach, as phenomena once attributed to supernatural forces, from lightning to disease, have yielded to natural explanations through patient investigation rather than premature metaphysical conclusions. The provisional nature of scientific knowledge further aligns with agnostic epistemology. Contemporary philosophy of science, influenced by thinkers like Thomas Kuhn and Karl Popper, recognizes that scientific theories remain perpetually open to revision or replacement as new evidence emerges and conceptual frameworks evolve. This understanding of scientific knowledge as provisional, rather than absolute, resonates with agnosticism's epistemological humility. Both perspectives acknowledge that human understanding remains incomplete and potentially fallible, particularly regarding questions at the boundaries of current knowledge. Quantum physics provides a particularly striking example of how scientific advancement can reinforce agnostic perspectives. The Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, with its emphasis on fundamental indeterminacy and observer effects, challenged classical determinism and suggested inherent limits to what can be known about physical reality. Physicist Werner Heisenberg's uncertainty principle demonstrated that certain pairs of physical properties cannot be simultaneously measured with arbitrary precision, establishing limits to human knowledge within the physical world itself. These discoveries led many physicists to adopt more epistemologically modest positions regarding what science can ultimately know about reality, positions aligned with philosophical agnosticism. Cosmology offers another domain where scientific investigation intersects with agnostic thinking. Contemporary cosmological models suggest that the observable universe emerged from the Big Bang approximately 13.8 billion years ago, but questions about what, if anything, existed before the Big Bang, or caused it, remain at the frontier of physics. Many cosmologists adopt an explicitly agnostic stance toward these questions, acknowledging that they may exceed the explanatory power of current scientific frameworks. Physicist Stephen Hawking exemplified this approach when he suggested that asking what came before the Big Bang might be conceptually incoherent, like asking what lies north of the North Pole. This recognition of conceptual boundaries aligns with agnosticism's acknowledgement of potential limits to human understanding. The compatibility between agnosticism and science extends to approaches toward consciousness and subjective experience. The hard problem of consciousness, explaining how physical brain processes generate subjective experience, remains one of science's most profound challenges. Many neuroscientists and philosophers of mind adopt positions aligned with agnosticism regarding this question, acknowledging the current explanatory gap while continuing empirical investigation. This approach allows scientists to pursue empirical research on neural correlates of consciousness, while maintaining philosophical humility about ultimate explanations for subjective experience. Evolutionary biology offers yet another domain where scientific understanding complements agnostic perspectives. Evolution by natural selection provides a powerful explanatory framework for biological diversity without requiring reference to supernatural design or purpose. However, evolutionary theory remains silent on ultimate questions about why there is something rather than nothing, or whether existence has inherent meaning. Many evolutionary biologists, including Stephen Jay Gould with his concept of non-overlapping magisteria, have advocated positions aligned with agnosticism, recognizing evolution's explanatory power within its domain, while acknowledging that some metaphysical questions may lie beyond scientific resolution. The compatibility between agnosticism and science extends to scientific practice itself. Studies consistently show that many practicing scientists identify as agnostic, finding this philosophical position congruent with their professional commitment to evidence-based reasoning and openness to revision. A 2009 Pew Research survey found that 30% of American scientists identified as agnostic or atheist, compared to 7% of the general public, with particularly high rates of agnosticism among leading scientists. This statistical pattern suggests that scientific training and practice often foster epistemological perspectives aligned with agnostic principles. This compatibility does not imply that all scientists must be agnostics, or that agnosticism represents the only philosophical position consistent with scientific inquiry. Many scientists maintain religious beliefs, finding ways to integrate faith with scientific understanding through various theological frameworks. Others adopt explicitly atheistic positions, concluding that scientific explanations render supernatural hypotheses unnecessary. The compatibility between agnosticism and science simply demonstrates that agnosticism offers one coherent philosophical framework for scientists navigating the relationship between empirical knowledge and ultimate questions. Critics sometimes characterize agnosticism as an intellectually timid position that impedes scientific progress by refusing to draw conclusions. However, history suggests the opposite. Agnostic approaches to knowledge often drive scientific advancement by maintaining openness to new evidence and resisting premature closure of inquiry. When scientists prematurely claim to have resolved fundamental questions, they risk closing off productive lines of investigation. Agnosticism's insistence on acknowledging the limits of current understanding keeps scientific questions open, potentially enabling future breakthroughs. The relationship between agnosticism and science continues to evolve as scientific knowledge advances and philosophical frameworks develop. Contemporary discussions of multiverse theories, simulation hypotheses, and the anthropic principle all engage questions at the boundary between science and metaphysics, where agnostic perspectives prove particularly valuable. By maintaining methodological rigor while acknowledging the limits of empirical investigation, agnosticism offers scientists a philosophical framework that supports both ambitious inquiry and intellectual humility. This compatibility between agnosticism and science ultimately reflects their shared commitment to proportioning belief to evidence, while recognizing the ongoing, incomplete nature of human understanding. In a cultural context often characterized by polarized debates between scientific materialism and religious fundamentalism, agnosticism offers a thoughtful middle ground that honors both scientific discovery and philosophical depth. This compatibility suggests that the most profound scientific minds often share with philosophical agnostics a fundamental intellectual virtue, the capacity to pursue knowledge vigorously while maintaining humble awareness of what remains unknown and perhaps unknowable. The psychology behind agnostic belief systems. The psychological underpinnings of agnosticism represent a complex interplay of cognitive processes, personality factors, developmental influences, and social dynamics that shape how individuals approach questions of ultimate reality and religious certainty. While extensive research has examined the psychology of religious belief and atheism, agnosticism has received comparatively less attention despite representing a distinct psychological orientation toward knowledge and certainty. Understanding. The psychology behind agnostic belief systems provides valuable insights into how humans navigate epistemological uncertainty in domains that exceed direct empirical verification. Cognitive psychology offers several frameworks for understanding agnostic thinking patterns. Research on cognitive styles suggests that agnostics often exhibit high levels of need for cognition, the tendency to engage in and enjoy effortful cognitive activities, combined with tolerance for ambiguity and cognitive complexity. These traits enable individuals to maintain multiple competing possibilities in mind simultaneously, without experiencing excessive psychological discomfort. Studies using measures like the cognitive reflection test indicate that agnostics typically score higher than both religious believers and atheists on analytical thinking measures, suggesting a thinking style that carefully evaluates evidence before reaching conclusions. Dual process theories of cognition provide another perspective on agnostic psychology. These theories distinguish between intuitive, automatic, System 1 thinking and reflective, deliberative, System 2 thinking. Research suggests that agnostics may engage System 2 processes more frequently when evaluating religious claims, consciously overriding intuitive tendencies toward either belief or disbelief. This reflective approach allows agnostics to recognize both the appeal of religious explanations and their evidential limitations, maintaining a position of epistemological humility rather than defaulting to either acceptance or rejection. Metacognition, thinking about one's own thinking, plays a particularly important role in agnostic psychology. Studies of metacognitive awareness show that agnostics typically exhibit high levels of what psychologists call epistemic metacognition, conscious awareness of how they know what they know and the limitations of their knowledge. This metacognitive awareness enables agnostics to distinguish between subjective certainty and objective justification, recognizing that feeling certain about a proposition doesn't necessarily make it true. Psychological research on calibration, the alignment between confidence and accuracy, suggests that agnostics may be better calibrated in their beliefs than either strong believers or strong disbelievers, avoiding overconfidence in domains where evidence remains limited. Personality psychology offers additional insights into agnostic orientations. Using the 5-factor model of personality, studies have found that agnostics typically score higher on openness to experience. The personality dimension associated with intellectual curiosity, preference for novelty, and appreciation for diverse perspectives. This openness may predispose individuals toward epistemological positions that remain receptive to multiple possibilities rather than committing to singular explanations. Research also indicates correlations between agnosticism and lower scores on dogmatism scales, suggesting a psychological preference for tentative rather than absolute conclusions. Developmental psychology illuminates how agnostic perspectives emerge across the lifespan. Cognitive developmental theories, particularly those building on Piaget's work, suggest that the capacity for formal operational thinking, including abstract reasoning about hypothetical scenarios and evaluation of logical arguments, provides the cognitive foundation necessary for agnostic thinking. This explains why agnosticism rarely emerges before adolescence, when these cognitive capacities typically develop. Longitudinal studies of religious development indicate that agnosticism often emerges during periods of identity exploration, particularly during late adolescence and early adulthood, when individuals actively question inherited beliefs and construct personal worldviews. Attachment theory provides another developmental perspective on agnostic belief systems. Research suggests correlations between secure attachment patterns and greater comfort with uncertainty in existential domains. Individuals with secure attachment histories may develop greater tolerance for ambiguity and less need for absolute certainty regarding metaphysical questions, making agnostic positions psychologically sustainable. Conversely, insecure attachment patterns sometimes correlate with either rigid religious certainty or dogmatic atheism, both of which provide psychological closure that agnosticism deliberately withholds. The psychology of moral reasoning also influences agnostic orientations. Research using Kohlberg's stages of moral development suggests that agnostics often operate at post-conventional levels of moral reasoning, evaluating ethical principles based on abstract principles rather than authority or social consensus. This capacity for autonomous moral reasoning enables agnostics to maintain ethical frameworks without requiring religious foundations, addressing one psychological function traditionally served by religious belief systems. Studies of moral intuitions further indicate that agnostics typically demonstrate harm-based moral reasoning patterns that prioritize consequences for well-being over adherence to sacred values or purity concerns. Social psychology illuminates how group dynamics influence agnostic identity formation and maintenance. Identity fusion theory suggests that agnostics typically maintain lower levels of fusion with religious groups, enabling more independent evaluation of religious claims without the psychological pressure of group conformity. Research on social identity complexity indicates that agnostics often maintain multiple, overlapping social identities, rather than deriving core identity from single group memberships, creating psychological space for more nuanced worldviews. These social psychological patterns help explain why agnosticism flourishes in pluralistic contexts, where diverse perspectives receive social validation. Cognitive dissonance theory provides insights into how agnostics manage psychological tension between competing evidence and perspectives. While strong believers may reduce dissonance by selectively attending to confirming evidence, and strong disbelievers may dismiss religious experiences as delusions, agnostics typically employ more complex dissonance reduction strategies. These include compartmentalization, separating questions of meaning from questions of factual accuracy, qualification, acknowledging the contextual nature of all knowledge claims, and integration, developing meta-perspectives that accommodate seemingly contradictory viewpoints. These sophisticated dissonance management strategies enable agnostics to engage diverse perspectives without experiencing debilitating cognitive conflict. Existential psychology offers particularly relevant perspectives on agnostic belief systems. Building on existentialist philosophy, this approach examines how humans construct meaning while facing fundamental uncertainties about existence. Research suggests that agnostics develop distinctive strategies for managing existential anxiety. Without requiring metaphysical certainty, these strategies include embracing provisional meanings, finding purpose in the pursuit of knowledge itself, developing comfort with mystery, and focusing on immediate human concerns rather than ultimate questions. These approaches enable agnostics to address existential needs traditionally served by religious certainty while maintaining epistemological humility. Neuropsychological research provides emerging insights into potential biological correlates of agnostic thinking. Brain imaging studies suggest that evaluating religious claims activates neural networks associated with analytical reasoning more strongly in agnostics than in either believers or atheists. Other research indicates that agnostics may exhibit distinctive patterns of activity in the anterior cingulate cortex, a brain region involved in detecting cognitive conflict and managing uncertainty. While these findings remain preliminary, they suggest potential neurobiological underpinnings for agnostic approaches to religious questions. The psychology of agnosticism continues to evolve as researchers develop more nuanced measures and theoretical frameworks. Contemporary research increasingly recognizes agnosticism not as a mere middle position between belief and disbelief, but as a distinct psychological orientation toward knowledge and certainty, with its own cognitive, developmental, and social dimensions. Understanding these psychological underpinnings helps explain why agnosticism represents a stable, psychologically coherent position rather than merely a transitional state between belief and disbelief. This psychological perspective also illuminates why agnosticism might increase in contemporary societies characterized by information abundance, exposure to diverse worldviews, and declining religious authority. These social conditions activate psychological processes, analytical thinking, metacognitive awareness, tolerance for ambiguity that support agnostic orientations. As educational systems increasingly emphasize critical thinking rather than acceptance of authority, psychological tendencies toward agnostic perspectives may continue to strengthen, reflecting broader cultural shifts in approaches to knowledge and certainty in an increasingly complex world. Agnosticism in popular culture and media representation. Agnosticism's representation in popular culture and media has evolved significantly over recent decades, reflecting broader shifts in religious demographics and public discourse about belief and doubt. From literature and film to television and digital media, agnostic perspectives have gained increasing visibility, though often with significant distortions and simplifications that fail to capture the philosophical depth of agnostic thought. Examining these representations reveals important insights about how contemporary culture understands and engages with questions of religious uncertainty and epistemological humility. In film, agnostic characters have transitioned from relative visibility to more nuanced portrayal over the past several decades. Early Hollywood cinema typically presented simplified religious binaries, devout believers contrasted with confirmed atheists, with little space for the epistemological middle ground that agnosticism represents. When uncertainty about religious questions appeared, it typically functioned as a narrative device leading to eventual faith rather than a sustainable philosophical position. Films like The Song of Bernadette, 1943, and The Bells of St. Mary's, 1945, exemplified this pattern, presenting religious doubt as a temporary condition to be overcome through miraculous intervention or moral example. Contemporary cinema has developed more sophisticated approaches to agnostic perspectives. Films like Contact, 1997, based on Carl Sagan's novel, present protagonists who maintain scientific rigor while remaining open to transcendent possibilities beyond current understanding. The film's protagonist, Dr. Ellie Arroway, embodies agnostic principles by insisting on evidence while acknowledging the limits of human knowledge, a portrayal that resonated with audiences navigating similar tensions between scientific and spiritual worldviews. More recent films like Life of Pi, 2012, embrace explicitly agnostic narrative structures, presenting multiple interpretations of events without definitively endorsing either naturalistic or supernatural explanations, thereby inviting viewers to engage with fundamental uncertainty rather than providing comfortable closure. Television has provided particularly fertile ground for exploring agnostic perspectives, with the medium's extended narrative format allowing for more complex character development and philosophical exploration. Shows like The Good Place, 2016-2020, have directly engaged philosophical questions about knowledge, ethics, and metaphysics through characters who maintain agnostic positions while actively seeking understanding. The character of Chidi Anagoni, a moral philosophy professor, exemplifies an agnostic approach to metaphysical questions, rigorously examining evidence and arguments while acknowledging the limitations of human reasoning. Similarly, series like The Leftovers, 2014-2017, built entire narrative worlds around fundamental uncertainty, presenting characters struggling to make meaning in contexts where definitive explanations remain unavailable. Procedural dramas have increasingly incorporated agnostic perspectives through characters who apply scientific methodology to apparently supernatural phenomena. Shows like The X-Files, 1993-2018, juxtaposed believers and skeptics while ultimately suggesting that both absolute belief and absolute disbelief represent inadequate responses to mysterious phenomena. The character of Dana Scully evolved from rigid skepticism toward a more nuanced position that maintained scientific rigor, while acknowledging experiences exceeding current scientific explanation, a character arc that resonated with viewers navigating similar epistemological tensions in their own lives. Literary fiction has provided some of the most sophisticated explorations of agnostic perspectives, with authors creating characters and narratives that engage deeply with questions of knowledge, doubt, and meaning. Contemporary novels like Julian Barnes's Nothing to Be Frightened of, 2008, and Jennifer Michael Hecht's Doubt a History, 2003, have directly addressed agnostic approaches to mortality and meaning, presenting characters who confront existential questions without requiring metaphysical certainty. These works move beyond simplistic portrayals of agnosticism as mere indecision, instead exploring it as a principled philosophical position with its own intellectual integrity and existential implications. Science fiction and speculative fiction have proven particularly conducive to exploring agnostic themes, with their capacity to imagine alternative metaphysical frameworks and challenge conventional certainties. Authors like Philip K. Dick, Ursula K. Le Guin, and Ted Chiang have created narratives that deliberately destabilize ontological assumptions, inviting readers to question the foundations of knowledge and consider multiple interpretations of reality. Works like Chiang's Story of Your Life, adapted as the film Arrival, present characters encountering phenomena that exceed conventional understanding, requiring epistemological humility rather than premature certainty, a narrative approach that embodies agnostic principles. Digital media have created new spaces for representing and discussing agnostic perspectives, with online communities, podcasts, and video content creators developing more nuanced approaches than traditional media. Podcasts like On Being with Krista Tippett feature conversations that explore spiritual and philosophical questions from multiple perspectives, including explicitly agnostic approaches that emphasize intellectual humility and openness to mystery. YouTube channels dedicated to philosophy and religious exploration, such as Crash Course Philosophy, present agnosticism not as a failure to decide, but as a sophisticated epistemological position with historical roots and contemporary relevance. Social media platforms have facilitated the emergence of agnostic voices previously underrepresented in traditional media. Hashtags like agnostic and online communities dedicated to philosophical discussion have created spaces where individuals can articulate agnostic perspectives beyond simplified stereotypes. These digital spaces have proven particularly important for individuals in religiously homogeneous communities, providing connection with others who share their epistemological approach to religious questions. The dialogical nature of these platforms allows for more nuanced exploration of agnostic positions than one-way mass media typically permit. Comedy and satire have provided important venues for exploring agnostic perspectives, often using humor to highlight the absurdity of absolute certainty about metaphysical questions. Comedians like Ricky Gervais, Stephen Fry, and Sarah Silverman have incorporated agnostic themes into their work, using comedy to challenge both religious dogmatism and militant atheism. Shows like South Park have satirized the certainty of both religious fundamentalists and aggressive atheists, suggesting that epistemological humility represents a more reasonable response to ultimate questions than dogmatic assertion. News media and documentary filmmaking have increasingly included agnostic perspectives in coverage of religious and philosophical issues, moving beyond simplistic believer versus atheist framings. Documentaries like The Most Unknown, 2018, explicitly adopt agnostic approaches to scientific questions at the frontiers of human knowledge, presenting scientists who maintain rigorous methodology while acknowledging the limits of current understanding. This shift in documentary approach reflects growing recognition that agnosticism represents not a failure of nerve, but a principled response to the complexity of certain questions. Despite this evolution toward more nuanced representation, significant challenges remain in popular culture's portrayal of agnosticism. Media representations often conflate agnosticism with general religious indifference, failing to distinguish between principled philosophical positions and casual disengagement from religious questions. Characters identified as agnostic frequently lack the philosophical sophistication that actual agnostics bring to questions of knowledge and belief, presenting simplified versions that miss the intellectual depth of agnostic thought. Additionally, media narratives often present agnosticism as a temporary position on the way to either faith or atheism rather than a stable philosophical stance with its own integrity. Commercial considerations also shape media representations of agnosticism, with market pressures favoring narratives that provide closure and certainty rather than embracing fundamental uncertainty. Films and television shows targeting mainstream American audiences often resolve religious questions definitively by the narrative's conclusion, reflecting audience preferences for emotional satisfaction over philosophical complexity. This commercial reality helps explain why genuinely agnostic narratives, those that maintain epistemological openness without resolving toward either religious or secular certainty, remain relatively rare in mainstream entertainment. As American, religious demographics continue evolving, with increasing percentages identifying as religiously unaffiliated. Media representations of agnosticism will likely continue developing in sophistication and prominence. The growing recognition that many Americans occupy complex positions between traditional religious belief and atheism creates market incentives for more nuanced portrayals of philosophical uncertainty. This evolution in representation matters not only for accurate portrayal of agnostic individuals, but for cultural engagement with fundamental questions about knowledge, certainty, and meaning in an increasingly complex world. Popular culture's engagement with agnosticism ultimately reflects broader cultural negotiations about the status of knowledge and certainty in contemporary society. As traditional sources of authority face increasing challenge while scientific advancement reveals new mysteries, agnostic approaches to knowledge gain cultural relevance beyond strictly religious questions. Media representations of agnosticism, at their best, invite audiences to embrace intellectual humility while maintaining rigorous inquiry, an epistemological stance with relevance far beyond traditional religious debates in an era characterized by information abundance, competing truth claims, and profound global challenges requiring both intellectual rigor and philosophical humility. As we've seen, media representations of agnosticism have evolved significantly, though many challenges remain in portraying this philosophical position with the nuance it deserves. If you enjoyed this cultural analysis, please support the channel by subscribing and sharing with fellow media enthusiasts. What films, shows, or books do you think best represent agnostic perspectives? Drop your recommendations in the comments. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep viewing media through a critical lens.